Hey everybody, welcome back for another episode of Ranching Reboot. This is number 103. In today's show, Kevin Muno, a first-generation rancher, shares his insights on running a ranching business in Southern California. With two 8,000-acre ranches, Kevin has a lot of experience in cattle transportation, grass-fed beef production, and implementing regenerative practices. He also talks about his business, Perennial Pastures, and how he is focused on e-commerce sales to reach a population of 20 million people within a 2-hour drive. If you're a rancher, aspiring rancher, or just interested in learning more about this industry, be sure to share this episode with your friends, family, and colleagues. We would love to hear your feedback, so don't forget to leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform. And if you want to support our show, please click on the sponsor links in the show notes. Finally, if you have any suggestions or questions for us, feel free to send us an email at redhillsrancher@gmail.com. Thanks for listening to the episode. Yo, what's good, my homies? It's your boy Red Hills, and I'm here to tell you about these Bobolink beef snacks. Let me tell you, they straight fire, you dig? I'm talking about real high-quality beef, seasoned to perfection and slow-cooked to give you that melt-in-your-mouth taste. And let's not forget about the packaging. It's tight, it's fresh, and it's perfect for on-the-go snacking. Now, I know what y'all might be thinking. Red, ain't no beef snack going to be good enough for me, but trust me, these Bobolink beef snacks are straight-up game changers. I'm talking about that real beef flavor, packed with protein and made with all-natural ingredients. So if you want to elevate your snack game, snack like a boss, then you got to try these Bobolink beef snacks. I'm telling you, they're the real deal. And don't take my word for it. Try them out yourself, and you'll see why I'm hooked. Trust me, you won't be disappointed. Peace out and stay snacking, my homies. My name's Red Hills Rancher, and I'm the steward of the Red Hills. And if you didn't know, you do now. Bow wow. All right, crew, I need to come clean. For the last 2 years, I've been taking grass-fed beef organ supplements. A few months ago, I reached out to several different brands, and I'm pleased to announce that I found a brand that I can align with. Introducing OneEarthHealth.com grass-fed and finished beef organ supplements. Look, we all know that the liver is one of the most nutrient-dense foods available. Packed with iron and B vitamins, it's a great source of choline and folate. Sourced from grass-fed and finished cattle with no fillers. I take the beef liver blend and the organs blend, which includes spleen, pancreas, kidney, heart, and yeah, a little more liver. I take them every day, and I feel great, except when I forget. Then I notice I have less energy and less focus. Check them out. Go to www.oneearthhealth.com/Brian Alexander or click the link in the show notes. Hey, you want to make a podcast? Spotify's got a platform that lets you make one super easily, then distribute it everywhere and even earn money. All in one place for free. It's called Spotify for Podcasters, and here's how it works. Spotify for Podcasters lets you record and edit podcasts right from your phone or computer, so no matter what your setup is like, you can start creating today. Then you can distribute your podcast to Spotify and everywhere else podcasts are heard. Video podcasts are also available on Spotify. And when you want to take your conversations with fans to the next level, Q&A and polls are the best way to get them talking. With Spotify for Podcasters, you can earn money in a variety of ways, including ads and podcast subscriptions. Best of all, it's totally free with no catch. I highly recommend you give it a try. Download the Spotify for Podcasters app or go to www.spotify.com/podcasters to get started today. Kevin Muno, welcome to Ranching Reboot. How are you today, sir?
I'm doing well, Brian. Thanks for having me.
So, you're in Southern California. What's the weather like out there right now?
Ooh, it's a pretty day. Yeah, blue skies and 65 degrees.
Did you have to look, or is that just what it always is?
That's usually what it is. Yeah, unless we get some big Pacific storm coming off the ocean.
65 at the beginning of February is pretty rare, and that's about what it was here just a couple hours ago. It was a really beautiful day here today too, but that's 65 is definitely not normal for South Central Kansas. Like, let's be clear.
Yeah, right on.
So tell me a little bit about your operation there in Southern California.
For sure. Yep. So I'm a first generation rancher. I was born in Los Angeles and was a baseball player my whole life. And I got into ranching by the way of nutrition and eating grass-fed beef. So I played baseball center field for the Toreros at University of San Diego and played there for 5 years. And while I was there, I got really into lifting and CrossFit brought me to the paleo diet. And I had
Okay.
a trainer there who was super good into nutrition, started fueling my body with great grass-fed protein, and immediately saw my results in the weight room and on the baseball field improved, and actually inspired my whole team to kind of go paleo, which was pretty cool. And actually, I just messaged that strength and conditioning coach the other day because he's still involved in the CrossFit world, and we want to start doing some promotions with local CrossFit gyms and get them some of our products that we're producing now. But yeah, about 2 years ago, I bought a local cattle company, fifth generation company. They had a death in the family, sadly, of the patriarch, and it was two widows running the company, and they just didn't want to do it anymore. So I was kind of first in line through some other efforts I had going on in the backcountry, and had a previous ranching operation back there, and was trying some different things, and so called them up and said, hey, I'd like to buy the company. And they had 290 pairs of black baldy cattle at the time, and two 8,000 acre leases, for a total of 16,000 acres under management. And we're blessed to be able to buy the company with some investors, and we've been running ever since. We did that right during the middle of the pandemic. I raised some capital with a small group of investors to do that. And yeah, so here we are in February 2023, 2 years really into probably the cattle side, and then 1 year really into the marketing side. So still a lot to learn, but we're kind of on our way and selling to, a population of 20 million folks within a 2-hour drive of us. So it's been fun.
That must be rough to have that many potential customers that close.
I tell you, it's well, it's a huge blessing. I mean, farmers markets, I think, aren't an option for a lot of folks in the country, but for us, they've been a huge blessing because each one of these cities that we're in has hundreds of thousands of people, and we can go and meet them and shake their hand and tell them about what we're doing and our whole journey and how we're improving soil health, and
Like,
the
what's a farmer's
process to
market
do that.
like out there?
It's pretty active. Yeah, we're in mostly coastal cities: Carlsbad, Encinitas, La Jolla, Little Italy downtown, and it can be a ton of foot traffic for sure. And folks just looking to get more in touch with their food. And the folks that are there, the demographics are great. It's, they're kind of on some path, and then when they hear about regenerative, they pretty inquisitive. Some folks know, they've either watched Kiss the Ground, or they've taken a soil health course, or they've read about it somewhere, Dirt to Soil or what have you, or they ask about it and they're inquisitive and they're like, oh, okay, so it's like better than sustainable. And we're like, yeah. So they're good. They've been a godsend for us in launching the business, but our focus, hopefully here in the short-term future, will be more e-commerce sales, which is where we're going.
What do you say when somebody comes up and says, well, what is regenerative? What does that even mean?
I try to break it down as simply as I can to them. And usually what I say is that we mimic nature with our agricultural practices. We try to graze our cattle in a way that mimics bison or wildebeest herds moving across grasslands, and they move in bunches and they stay in an area for a short amount of time, and they often don't come back to that area for a long time. And this method of agriculture has been proven to build soils all across the world, and those healthier soils lead to more nutrient dense grass, which leads to a more nutrient dense animal and a more nutrient dense human. And they kind of shake their head and go, yeah, that makes sense.
What kind of grasses do you have on well, I guess let's talk about your mountain ranch. What kind of grasses are there? Are they like native grasses, or are they quote improved planted stuff?
We don't really have any improved pastures, no irrigation. A lot of them are, I guess what you could say, naturalized annuals, mostly I think from seeds that the Spanish brought over. So a lot of annual oats and cheatgrass, soft chest. So mostly cool season annual pastures, Brian. And then we do have a decent amount of cool season native perennials though too. Our state grass, Nacella pulchra, or California purple needlegrass is kind of our foundation cool season perennial. But we do have warm season perennials scattered out there. And as we've started to run some safe to fail trials and different densities via polywire and some of the fencing infrastructure we've put in, we've seen some of those start to come back. So we're excited for potential of both cool season perennials and warm season perennials kind of on the same ranch at the same time. I think that's one of the huge benefits of running a ranch in California is you do have the potential, I believe, for year-round green because we don't get a winter. We don't really get snow, So if you're able to bring those warm season perennials back and get them rooted and get them thriving, I think there is potential for kind of a varying sort of, year-round green structure potentially. That's the goal, at least that we're, future landscape goal that we're working towards is perenniality in both cool season and warm season.
I could get behind that. That'd be nice to be somewhere where I'm growing warm season grass all year round and, a little bit of cool season too. That'd be
right.
Like a wonderful place to live. I guess the limiting factor to that is going to be, rainfall. Out here in the plains, I'm assuming I get a little more rainfall than you do. Okay. Normally, I should probably get more rainfall than you do. I don't think I had more rain than you did last year. Like something like 12 inches is all we got. And we're supposed to get a lot closer to 20 or 22.
Gotcha. Yeah. Yeah, that's how it can be like for us here too. Our average on the coastal ranch is 12 and then in the mountains is 18, but it can get pretty low on each one of those extremes, down to 8 on the coastal ranch or 10 or 11 at the mountain ranch. But this year it's been good for us. You've probably seen California in the news. We've gotten some of those big atmospheric rivers that have come over and dropped some nice, good moisture for us. So we've gotten 10 inches on the mountain ranch just in January alone. So very blessed to have that this year.
How much of that went down the creek?
I know, right? Good amount. We have pretty sandy, loamy soils, so and it wasn't all at once. I think Northern California got it way worse than us as far as the whole atmospheric river deal, but a lot of it still went in the creek. We don't currently have a super effective water cycle where we're at. We still got a lot of work to do. Decent amount of bare ground. When we took over the Mount Ranch, it was one big 8,000 acre pasture, and we've been putting in a lot of high tensile fence. And of the high tensile fencing pastures, I think we have 12 now, and we subdivide some of those high tensile pastures with polywire to get more density and more animal impact. But we have a lot more fencing to build and more water to put in. So hopefully that will get better and better here. I'm excited for this year because we finally baselined our soils and we jumped in with the Regenerative group that Gabe Brown and Alan Williams and Shane New have started, which is sort of the third new regenerative certification. So they came out last year and baselined our soils on a couple of our ranches. And so I'm excited to finally really get into some very intensive management and longer recovery periods and things like that. But it's been definitely a journey here in the first couple of years.
It always is a journey. When somebody asks me what regenerative agriculture is, it's it's hard to pin down an answer, right? Like, and you kind of have to tailor your answer to the person that's asking the question. But at the end of the day, it's not always about a destination. It's about the journey. And that's what regenerative ag is. It's a journey, not a set of practices or principles. I mean, it's an entire change of thought process.
Amen. Yeah, amen to that. we do ranch tours every month now, and we get 30 to 40 people there. And that's one of my main messages is, hey, this is a journey, and hopefully you're back here in 5 years and you'll see, a good amount of change. And even 10 years down the road, you'll see more change. But all we can do as producers is be transparent about the efforts that we're taking and how it's affecting the land and what outcomes we're receiving. But yeah, it's not a straight line, that's for sure.
One thing I noticed on your website is you wrote an article about the 4 pillars of regenerative ranching. You want to talk about those for a minute?
Sure, yeah. I picked those up from one of the early classes that I attended on YouTube University, and that was from Jaime Elizondo and Johann Zietzman. And I thought it was just a good way to kind of explain some of the practices, that are involved in as simple way as possible, right? And some of the easiest things you can do to kind of start down this path, right? So yeah, the correct calving season, just calving with nature is one of the easiest things that you can do in terms of just pull your bulls out at the right time of year and put them in at the right time of year, right? That's one of the things we can do as ranchers. That's very easy. It doesn't involve a lot of capital or investment in infrastructure. It's just a change in management. So trying to time that obviously with where nature's calving, so for us, we're trying to calve in the spring when our green up comes from the cool season grasses, just so that colostrum and mama's milk's highest nutrient density. So that's, first step there. And then adaptive genetics, right, is another key one for us as you start to push your cattle, with higher density and try to have them eat farther down on the plant. It's important that those animals can still stay in good body condition for that. And you're also moving them around a little bit more on the ranch too. So it's important that, they're fit enough to do that, that they're not lazy, and they can work in that higher density grazing system. And then, yeah, the last two, high stock density grazing and correct supplementation, are super critical, I think, especially for dry land environments where you're trying to hit the land as hard as you can, get a really high level of utilization, clear those growth points, knock a bunch of litter down on the ground, heavily dung and urinated area, and then allow for a recovery that is timed with the species that you want to see, which for us is a lot of those cool season perennials I was talking about earlier. And then as you work on your adapted genetics, if your herd isn't as adapted as it should be to start, then you got to supplement a little bit there in the beginning until you get the composite breed that you're working towards or the genetics that you're working towards. So supplementing a little protein or minerals, things like that, just to make sure that your cows stay in as good as condition as they can. Now, we've been a little bit, I guess, less into the whole corrective supplementation thing. I think this year we will try some free choice minerals, but we haven't really done a ton of protein supplementation. And early on, we inherited the herd, the 290 pairs of baldy calves or baldy cows and calves. And there was just a lot of older cattle. They hadn't really culled in quite some time. So we just started off with a pretty big ground beef program. And I think that's one of the biggest benefits of having your own direct-to-consumer meat business is when you cull, you make money, so you can turn them into ground beef. And we're selling ground beef for something like, well, we sell it for $12 a pound at farmer's market. If you get bulk, we're selling it for 11. So it's quite a good price on the ground beef.
Sounds like I need to rent a truck. So that's a little more.
We started aggregating, Brian, from other places in the country. We've started doing that, yeah, because this is where the population is. I mean, 20 million within a 2-hour drive. If you just do the stats on our county alone, 3 million people in San Diego County alone. And if you look at, on average, folks are eating around 55 pounds of beef in a year. And if you're looking at a conservatively of carcass of about 500 pounds, it's roughly equated to around 300,000 head of livestock in just our county alone. So we have one of the largest ranches, and we're barely even meeting, not even close to 1% of that demand. So
I knew
aggregating from,
like you because I did the same math for my county in relationship to my ranch and my herd. And yeah, it's not even a hair on a fly on a hair on a fly's butthole.
right, for sure. Yeah. How
But
many people in your county, Brian?
uh like 6,000 maybe.
Wow.
Not many. Not
Yeah.
many. Our county seat, they're probably below 2,000 now. And then there's another community of just over 1,000.
Yeah.
And maybe we're under six. We're pretty rural. It's
Wow. Yeah. How far are you from St. Francis, Kansas?
about it'd probably take me about 4 hours to get up there. So I'm
Okay.
20 miles from Oklahoma, right in the middle between
Uh-huh.
Colorado and Missouri. And,
Okay. Gotcha.
so
Okay.
I know you know my buddy Mike Calicrate.
Yeah, yeah. That's the only place I've been in Kansas is to his place to check out his facility there.
I've never been to St. Francis. I've looked at it on Google Earth, and I don't think my place looks anything like that. My place looks like, well, what you see behind me. But
Right, right.
you know, rolling hills, native grass. I get a little more summer. He gets a little more winter. He gets a little
Okay.
less rain. I get a little more 100-degree days.
Okay.
You know,
Gotcha.
there's a lot of people that live way out to the west side of Kansas that'll say, "Oh, that big blue stem doesn't grow there. Oh, that Indian grass, oh, will grow here." Well, it's in the ditch right next to your fence line. I'm not sure why you're saying that. It's Mike and I have a good laugh. You know, we've laughed about that in the past because you drive down I-70 and there's guys out there to be like, "Oh, that grass won't grow here." Well, yeah, it will because it's growing in the ditch right across the fence from your pasture. So
For sure. Yeah, it was great to go visit him, and really we're following kind of his recommendation on a vertically integrated strategy. We're going to be investing in our own processing facility this year, and super excited about that, and doing another round of capital to make that happen. So we'll be able to control, almost everything from paddock to plate, everything except the trucking, right? Coming back to that a little bit, but yeah, so lot to be thankful for Mike and his kind of recommendation on that, and pushing us in that direction heavily.
that's what Mike does. He has a tendency to push people in that direction. Like we had a probably right around the same time you guys were getting started, just as COVID was starting to shut down the world. I had a lot of conversations with Mike, and I was pretty close to. I got pretty close to thinking about building my own packing plant, and then I remembered where I live and realized I might be better off letting somebody else take that risk.
For sure. Yep.
Because it
Yeah.
comes to access to market. And, the people you said, I forget the number you said that you have within a 2 hour radius. It's like 10 million, like just
20.
okay, 20 million.
Yeah.
I don't think there's 500,000 within 2 hours radius from me.
Right. Yep.
And, 80% of those are going to be in one city that's
Yep.
almost exactly 2 hours away. And, I've been doing a lot of thinking. So let's just talk about it. There's a lot of land in the plains. There's a lot of cattle in the plains, and there's a lot of demand east of here in the East Coast and on the West Coast. And yeah, there's a lot of cattle that get finished in California feed yards. Okay, and I know, yeah, that's not your deal. I'm just like kind of talking out loud here.
Right.
And they've got to import a lot of corn over the mountains from the Midwest, basically Kansas, Nebraska,
Yeah.
Iowa, Illinois, wherever. They've got to
Right.
import a lot of their feed stuff. And, as we're starting to see that, these supply chains are starting to fail, not just international supply chains, some regional, local supply chains are starting to creak under pressure. And I think that we all need to be thinking about more localized methods of production, production consumption cycles and keeping everything as close to home as I can, as we all can. That being said, there still needs to be a better way for me to get my product from here to help you satisfy demand where you're at. And that's
Amen.
and that's real interesting because I was actually looking this morning. It's probably not a coincidence; it's on my mind right now. But I was looking this morning, and I had the idea about what a company would look like that's a cross between FedEx and Americold. If you're not familiar with Americold, they've got a network of freezer and refrigerated warehouses across the country.
Okay.
So what would it? I wonder what that would look like. Like if you could call for a pickup, like I take one to my processor, they get it processed. From there, it goes to an Americold warehouse, and I get a text that says, "Hey, you got this much in the warehouse," or I have inventory on the app. And if there's somebody that needs it in LA that's bidding $12 a pound, it can tell me how much it would cost to ship it from their warehouse to the distribution point, and it can be picked up there, and I know all those costs. I think I just invented an app for somebody.
For sure. And it's amazing at how many apps there are out there. Just getting into this e-commerce thing, we're on Shopify, but there's a whole network of apps that Shopify developers are developing that plug into Shopify. Like, for example, we have this one called Recharge, and we use it for our subscription boxes. And you pay, an extra add-on fee, not very much, to get that app that plugs right into your store, and it looks at your inventory and it bills the person, every month, and sends us a notification on the order, and they can log in and change their membership if they want to skip a month, this, that, and I didn't have to do anything, So the ability, weirdly, Brian, my first job out of college was actually software sales, and I spent 1 year selling tech software. It's a very successful company, competes with Salesforce. If you've heard of Salesforce, they're a customer resource management tool out of San Francisco. And
slightly out of my wheelhouse, but I have heard of that one.
Yeah. If you've done any kind of sales, they're the 800-pound gorilla in the room as far as that app goes. But you can build any sort of app on this platform, right? And I think we're just starting to see the benefit of those kind of all coming together. And the software as a service model is amazing. Somebody like you could have an idea and go out there and create an app and have it ready and deployed fairly quickly, where 10 years ago that was much more difficult. So
maybe somebody like you could go make an app. I make a podcast and I post on social media, and that's kind of where I end right now.
That's more that you're more tech savvy than I am. I don't have a podcast.
Yeah, if only you knew.
That's awesome.
So, tell me about your cows.
Yeah.
What cows you running out there?
Yeah. So we bought those black baldies, and we've been crossing the baldies with some good Mashona genetics. We bought some semen from Kit at Faro, and we bought Zimbob, a good amount of him. He's kind of
Slightly jealous.
I think he's famous now, pretty famous, as like a very well-known Mashona. And although Johann Zietzman does not like that name, but that's his name on there. So we've AI'd a lot of our black baldies to him, and then all the replacement cattle that we've bought after we've done big cullings have been fairly cheap Corini heifers or young cows at the sale barn. So we've been picking them up for $300 to $500 at the sale barn, and we've been putting Short Magnum on him as a big red Angus bull from Glen Barlow up in Wyoming. And so Gillette, Wyoming, I think is where Glenn lives. And so we're, going for that efficient grass converting animal that can stay fat in a higher density grazing system, can eat farther down on the plant and utilize more grass and stay fat and give us a calf every year. So yeah, that's kind of where we're headed as a way of composite. Might get even a little weirder. There's a guy out of Australia that's part of I don't know if Troy Gaylor is in the Johan Zietzman's Profitable Ranching WhatsApp group, but he's
Name
got
looks
some really
familiar.
yeah, he's got some really amazing Baran and Nguni genetics that he's got out of Australia, and he's almost ready to start shipping to the States. So we've been talking to him too about getting some straws in and throwing that into the mix. So I'm not after any sort of particular percentage, Brian. I'm just kind of out there for what works, and I'm a big believer in safe to fail trials. And one of the things that recently came to me actually, as far as transparency goes and having our own facility is, you work with these processors and asking them to do anything out of the ordinary is just like, pulling an arm and a leg. But when we control it, we'll be able to probably, because we want to, I don't know if we're going to do it or not, but if it's worth it and we see a return on it, we might genetically test the herd. We'll definitely test it to see which bulls are performing best and who's breeding the most. So if we're going to do that, we might as well figure out what percentage each animal is, and then we could almost sell that like, hey, you're eating a half Coriani, half Angus. You're eating a half Moshona, half Angus. You're eating a, quarter Nguni, half, three-quarter, right? So like people can start to kind of get a sense. Like we've been looking at this whole uniformity thing, and I think from like a body type perspective, we're moving in a certain direction. But I don't know. I just think that people can kind of choose for themselves like what sort of type that they like, and yeah. So I just had that idea the other day. I was like, well, our composite probably won't be something standard for 5 to 7 years. This process takes a long time to kind of arrive at what you think is good for the ranch as far as locally adapted breeds. So why not try a few different types and just see what's good and what does and what thrives. And I think a lot of them will thrive because they're all very resilient, unimproved breeds. But it'll be fun to see the eating quality and how it kind of correlates all the way through. I'm excited for that.
Do you have any of those Zimbob calves on the ground yet?
We do, yeah.
How do you like them?
I like them a lot. I like them a lot.
Put any on the rail yet?
No, not on the rail yet.
Are they gaining?
Yes.
Okay. And you said that you were putting Red Angus on your Sailborn Corrientes.
Yep.
Any thought? Any thought to putting some Zimbob in that bloodline?
We've definitely done that too, and we actually bought. So we do AI first 21 days, and then second 21 days we've been doing some cleanup with Moshona bulls. We bought 12 Moshona bulls from Jaime Elizondo in Florida from that Midnight Ranch that he was previously managing in Crescent City, Florida. And we've had some bulls get out and breed some Coriani. But then I was like, why not? Like that it'll be a smaller animal, but we have such a big ground beef program. I don't know if you've gotten on this train yet, but it might just be a coast thing or whatever, but we're selling the crap out of Ancestral Blend, which is like the liver blend, heart and liver in the ground beef. So like that, and then we do snack sticks and hot dogs. So we have like a pretty big ground beef program. I'm like, like, Johan always talks about the fastest gain for the smallest frame, and I'm like, well, that could certainly be a Moshona Coriani, for sure. Like I'm really, really excited to see how that turns out. It'll be smaller, like that carcass isn't going to be very big at all, but I'm pretty darn sure it's gonna stay fat and be in good condition probably all throughout the year. So
Yeah, I don't need to hang, a 1,300-pound carcass like that.
no.
I don't think that would make me money. There's a certain point, with the genetic base of a smaller forage efficient animal that it's just not economical to take them past probably 900 or 1,000 pounds no matter what you do. uh,
Right. Yeah.
you mentioned earlier a term that I wanted to
Mhm.
circle back to. You said corrective supplementation. What did you mean
Mhm.
by that?
Corrective supplementation. Well, I think you're just pushing them harder. You're having them eat farther down the plant. So I think the term corrective would just be if they're a non-adapted cow and they can't convert that higher fiber forage into meat and fat, then muscle and fat, then you're kind of coming in and correcting what they might more naturally get, or that they might more naturally is probably not the best word, but under better conditions would get. So, in the dry season, supplementing a little alfalfa to kind of help them burn through some of that fiber, I think is kind of where we're at. Or I guess you could say, as I'm thinking here, corrective, in the way of animals could range for a lot more of their minerals when they had larger pastures and would go from state to state to, minerally dense areas to balance themselves. So they don't have that ability now with barbed wire fencing and chopped up pieces of land. So kind of coming in and correcting that potential mineral deficiency that they might not get access to on the ranch, and giving them a little bit of that to make sure that you're taking care of them.
Okay, that makes sense. I You're talking about ancestral blends, and that's one of the things on our whiteboard. Um, Getting a processor here to do that, it's we're getting some of them to come around, but that's on the list to do this week is call around for processors and try to get my summer processing lined up and
Mm-hmm.
try to do some ancestral blends. But I'm also, at the same time trying to work out, you know, how do I get my product to more customers? Okay,
Yeah.
I've also made arguments about food miles on the podcast before, so don't come after me, people. But um, crap, and I forgot what I was going to say. Um, so we're talking about your Zimbab calves, Corrientes. Um, what have you noticed difference in the way those animals perform between your Corrientes and the Baldies that came with the ranch?
Luckily, Ryan, we were able to probably cull 20 to 30% and probably now up to 40% of that original herd. So it's interesting now that we're kind of down to the ones that we want from the black baldies. Certainly there's a little more shine, I'd say, on the Coriani Mashonas. But the Angus, and specifically, the Baldies, because a little bit of that hybrid vigor, they're doing great too. We to be fair, we really haven't been for 365 days a year running at high density, so I haven't put them to the full test yet. But they're working harder than they did prior in one big 8,000 acre paddock. So we're moving them around. They're utilizing more grass than they never had. So it'll be more of a test, and I'll probably have more to say on that question after this year's worth of grazing, because we're probably going to put in 30 more pastures this year. So yeah, but I think as we put more pressure on, the cream will rise to the top, and those more adapted cattle will just stay in the program rather than be cold. If they don't have a calf, we call them.
What's the seasonality of your forage like? Do you have a dormant or dry season where it gets really, really poor? And you said you have to supplement with alfalfa. Like I'm feeding mine alfalfa and protein tubs to get them through for the same reasons. So how bad is like your dormant season?
It's pretty long. Mediterranean climates are known for wet winters and dry summer. So the wet winter is really 3 to 4 months of rain, 3 to 4 months, mostly 3 of green. And then from May till say December, we're pretty dry. So depends if we get any early fall rains, but even early fall, it's not really warm enough for it to start to green up. So like we're pretty green right now. Like now's pretty peak green for us, especially with the rain that we had this year, 10 inches in January. Um, so yeah, that's kind of our flow of grass.
So how do you the question I'm worried about in my operation is managing the seasonality of what I would call quote finished. Something with that's been on good grass for a month or two and has actually laid down some extra fat that she would need to carry her through the winter. I If I took one right now to the processor, um, I mean, it wouldn't have a whole lot of fat on it. She'd be pretty lean. And
Yeah.
so how are you managing the seasonality of grass and harvest?
So what's interesting, Ryan, is we manage a piece of land up in Montana. So one of our investors owns some land in Opine, Montana, which is northeast Montana. So um, I'm learning more about colder season grazing climates. And recently the question came up because we butchered some cattle 2 months ago. So it would have been the beginning of December. And at that point, they'd been on feed for a little while. It's, I think like a month and a half they'd been on feed. Just grass hay put up from the ranch, good grass hay, perennials, hard grasses. And that beef's eating well. We're getting really good feedback from that beef. So it just led me to kind of question, okay, well, obviously as a rancher, you want to feed as little as possible to kind of get you through the winter, right? Some of these ranches up there are just accustomed to feeding 6 months out of the year. And then it got me thinking, and I was like, okay, well, they're pretty much just in a grass feed lot. And some guys feed to different levels of body condition, right? So some guys are feeding up there to feed to really fat body condition, and some are just feeding to reduce input costs and get themselves through winter, right? So I don't know. And then if you're trying to minimize your feed and do bale grazing or graze through some like this winter, I think for a lot of I can't speak for Kansas, but I talk with Paul Brown a little bit up in North Dakota, and then Montana, and this year has been one of those years where bale grazing has been tough, and any sort of forage that they're getting underneath the snow is pretty much minimal. But the last few winters, I know he said that they, fed 90 days, I think, is like the shortest. So they're still out there grazing and they're getting the supplementary feed. So I don't know, um, as far as like eating quality, we have a lot of thoughts on that. One of our partners, Graham Hand, has worked for the Australian meat grading system for quite some time, and they test a lot more factors than we do. Like USDA tests for ossification and marbling, and they test for like 11 different things, like pH levels when the carcass goes into rigor mortis, acid levels, like all sorts of different tests that they run because Australia produces mostly, they haven't gotten into the feedlot deal as heavily as we have. They produce mostly grass cattle. So this whole meat standards Australia is much. So we're going to apply a lot of that to our own facility this year. And I'm really curious just to see sort of what passes that test, because that test is highly accurate. Like they've done a bunch of blind taste tests with grass fed and grain fed, and they've like pre-tested them on the rail, and they say, okay, this is going to eat well and this will not eat well. And the test that they do is highly corollary to like, the actual results, right? So yeah, I don't know. We're testing all sorts of assumptions just in terms of when we kill, and then I mean, we've killed some animals in the fall down here, and we've gotten good feedback from that meat. So like we have acorns that fall in the fall here, and the cattle pick up the acorns, right? So like, does that have a different taste and add to the flavor profile of the beef, right? So I guess that's a long-winded answer to your question of like, when are we killing and how are we thinking about carcass quality and all that. It's just like, I think we're definitely, obviously, we have a finishing season, and that's spring through kind of early summer, but we're testing out some other seasons just to kind of get a feel for if we have fat cattle then, and they test open, and they're not pregnant, and and we don't want to wait all the way till spring. Maybe we run a load through at that point and just get that. That's the beauty of working at the farmers market too, is like you see those people every week and you go, hey, that skirt steak I sold you, or hey, that ribeye I sold you, how'd it eat? How was it? We get directly weekly feedback, which you can't really necessarily get from an online program because you're sending somebody a box of beef, and if they don't like it, they might not ever order from you again, and they might not give you a review, so you don't get that customer feedback.
I was going to ask you what your experience has been in the farmers markets, because a lot of the folks that I've talked to previously on the podcast, mostly from the Plain States, they say that, like, as far as a gross sales point of view, that farmers markets don't necessarily pay for the time that it takes them to go do them. But
Yeah.
farmers market is more for, getting your face out there and driving sales, to your website later down the week and getting name recognition and, building that initial customer contact that comes to the farmers market first and then starts buying online. That doesn't sound like that's your experience.
No, and I think we're blessed with the amount of population that we have. It's certainly not our highest margin sale because we still have to pay the market 10% for being there, and we pay our farmers market workers 20% of the sales. But when we have full inventory in of steaks and bone broth and snack sticks and hot dogs and all our roast cuts and ground beef and ancestral blend, some of these markets are pulling in for a 4-hour market, $1,500, $1,800, a market. We're just doing beef, right? We want to add chicken this year, add pork. People are asking us, hey, do you have plans of producing this, so for 4 hours, right? For, let's say it's 7 hours total as far as pack in. Our employees come to our warehouse, they pack in, they pack out, they got to drive, 30 minutes to the market. So let's say it's 7 hours total, and it's a $1,500 market, right? They're making 20%. So 20% of 1,500 is $300, right? So they're making $300. I pay the market 150, 10%, so $1,500 minus 450, right, is 1,050, per market. So again, we're just doing beef. There's days where we hit 800, right? So you chalk it up as, hey, we got paid to market today. But we run a lot of promos there. We're capturing emails. Yeah, there's a lot of things that you can do to kind of list build and get product feedback on new products. Like we just started making beef tallow. Okay, we brought that out to the market. Just gone 2 seconds. Okay, we know that's a good seller. Let's ramp that up. So it has a value. I think if you're making 200-300, I don't know, to be honest. If you're getting that value back from just meeting those people, I think there's other places you can meet people. I think at the minimum, it does make sense to have at least one. That way you have a direct line. You get 4 times a week. You get to talk to the customers. You develop a conversation. You get some of your early people to write reviews about you, testimonials. But if you're not making a little margin on top of your costs, for some folks, I don't think it makes sense.
You mentioned ancestral eating a couple times and said nose to tail. What do you think about it? What do you think about our boy Liver King?
Oh, I don't know. It boggles my mind how it took people so long to kind of figure that out. And his boy Paul Saladino, Carnivore MD, was kind of caught in the middle of that, but the guy had to know, and he's all about calling stuff out as bullshit, like kale's bullshit and this is bullshit. He should have called bullshit on his partner, earlier on than he did. And it's sad, but I don't think it's gonna slow down the trend of folks getting back to nutrient dense eating, and I think it's here to stay, unlike the plant-based movement or whatever. It's just I think anything that speaks to our genetic code is like something like deep down, and it sticks. It stays there, and that was me like what is it now, 10, 12 years ago. I'm 35, so when I was in college and I first read Dr. Lauren Corndane's book on the paleo diet, and he was like, yeah, evolutionarily, we've been eating this way for thousands of years. I was like, oh, that makes sense. I mean, nature always bats last, and, we're certainly our genetic code changes a little bit, but I don't think it's changed that much since those days. So,
What is it? 98% of animals are edible, but only 2% of plants are edible. Something like that.
right, right. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, I think that there were people that knew that could have said something, and not to. I don't know Paul Saladino at all, not to throw any shade at him, but he had to have known. He
Yeah.
had to have known.
Yeah.
Now,
For sure.
but I guess it just shows you that the guy had a plan. He knew it was all for show, but he had to have known that he was going to get caught. That's the part that baffles me. It's like he should have had a better plan for when he got caught.
Right.
I mean,
Right. Exactly. Yeah. I think he denied it originally and then owned up. And I think he's got some legal stuff going on now too, which, it is what it is. But yeah, I like Saladino. Again, I think he's just aggressively, blatantly consistent with his media. I mean, I love that he's going to the stores and he's looking at the back of ingredient boxes and just calling people. Like, I love that, and he's brought a ton of people to us, this ancestral blend. Like, people are watching his deal. Some of the Sean Baker, some of these other carnivore, influencers, and they're like, hey, I heard about this, I'm pregnant, and this and that. My wife, we just had our first. She had ancestral blend through her whole pregnancy, through breastfeeding, and absolutely crushed it. It's almost like a prenatal, like the choline and the folate and all this stuff they're telling you to take in a supplement. It's there in the liver, and then the ancestral blend is so approachable. Tacos, meatballs, meat sauce, stir fry. I mean, and you barely taste it. So it's something very easy to sell, and it's been hugely great for our business. And so yeah, I'm at the end of the day, I'm grateful for the Saladinos and Liver King. He's his own thing, but I think we as ranchers owe a lot to the folks that are helping to spread the good message of nutrient dense meat, for sure.
well, congrats on being a dad. That's pretty cool.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you. Appreciate it. You have any kids?
They're all grown and out of the house.
Good for you.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So, what does high stock density look like for you? Like pounds per acre over a day? How are you measuring that?
Yeah, it's kind of a visual to me, 4 moves a day, shoulder to shoulder, making sure they're in good condition. So I'd say anywhere between 500,000 pounds to 1,000,000 pounds, to the acre, where it makes sense, where you need it. Again, our soils are fairly sandy, not a ton of clay, some capping. So I don't know. We still haven't run our safe to fail trials. We're doing those in conjunction with putting in our infrastructure. So I want to run different densities and different recoveries. We're going down to Servando Diaz's place down in Chihuahua 2 weeks from now to check out his operation. He's been working off 18-month recoveries for a long time and has seen a lot of improvement in his warm season, actually cool season grasses coming up, I think. But he's starting to get both cool season and warm season, and that 18 months kind of gives 2 growing seasons to the to the plants to see what does come up. So yeah, we'll see. I mean, as tight as you can, that makes sense, for your management, is what that means to me.
Is prescribed burning a thing out there at all where you're at?
It is, yeah. Cal Fire is starting to kind of get on that deal. I think that's our one. Supposedly, our governor's putting a lot of money into that. We'll see.
Well,
We'll see.
not just for like state forest lands and federal lands in California. Like I'm talking, like,
Mm.
is there any kind of prescribed fire culture with landowners and land managers, private landowners and managers?
I wouldn't say culture, no. There's a guy, Matt Shapiro, who's doing some tests in grasslands at different intensities, I think, and different points of the growth stage. And he's got some interesting research on that. So there's some trials being run, but certainly it's not a thing, for folks to, I think we're so fire averse out here that, a rancher burning his grasslands, to like rejuvenate them or whatnot. I don't know really anybody who
You're
does that.
one bad spark or one escaped fire away from
Yeah.
national news, whereas
Yeah.
out here 350,000 acres can burn up in 2 days and like nobody cares.
Right.
I mean, not
Yeah.
nobody cares. It was a big deal to those of us that had to go through it, but it didn't make, I mean, it barely was a blip on national news.
Right. Yeah. No, it's so is that part of your culture out there then? Are guys burning or
Yes, we
okay,
have
okay.
to keep burning on the plains. We have to keep fire on the plains, or we're not going to have prairie anymore. Like,
Mm,
and I'm hoping to do kind of a series about this on the podcast sometime whenever I get around to it, and talk some more about invasive brush management and the threat of the how much of a threat that the grassland biome is under in the Great Plains. So here's the numbers. There's 2% of the original native prairie left in the
mm,
plains, and we're losing that 2% remnant prairie at a rate faster to invasive trees and brush than
mm,
it was ever converted out to farmland in the first place.
mm. Interesting.
And it's the brush that we're losing it to. Most of it can be dealt with properly timed fire.
Nice.
And what can't be dealt with fire, it's either bring in another species to graze it, or graze at a different time of the year, or with higher
Right.
stock density. Like almost,
Right.
and it's hopefully we'll get there. But as far as fire, I've talked about it a little bit before on a podcast, but I think I was like 8 when my dad gave me a drip torch and said, "Go that way."
Mm-hmm.
So I have legitimately that'd be over 35 years of burning experience out here in these hills.
Mm-hmm.
I was in the Navy for 8.5 years and did some different kind of firefighting and damage control and some leadership training in there and how to lead what do they call it, repair locker leader. I did some repair locker leader training, so it's like trying to coordinate different teams doing different things, and
Mm-hmm.
that translated well. So how that's relevant? Yes, we burn pastures, like asterisks, when we get enough rain to do so safely,
Mm-hmm.
or we grow enough fuel to do it. In the last couple of years, I haven't been able to stockpile enough grass to where I felt comfortable burning. Like it comes burning season, I look at them like, yeah, we gotta keep this stockpile for another couple months. But anyway, yeah, we do quite a bit of burning out here. There's some years where our burn association that we've burned over 20,000 acres, just our little burn association of a couple of neighbors and some friends and
Okay.
maniacs. Um, we've driven an hour and a half as a group. We've convoyed an hour and a half west of here to help a friend and help get a burn association started over there, so we didn't have to go help him anymore because we love that guy, but it's like we're not driving over there an hour and a half to help you, but we'll do it a couple times to train everybody else over there on how to do it so we don't have to do it anymore. So
Right.
that's where we go with burn culture. And I'm not going to say that we have a really, exceptionally strong burn culture outside of my area, because we really don't. And it's something that collectively everybody up and down the plains needs to work on,
Mm-hmm.
is land maintenance and burning.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a tool, right? It's one of the tools. So used correctly and appropriately, um,
I mean,
I think,
it's expensive to hire a guy with a chainsaw to go out and hand cut them. I mean,
for sure.
I'm a rancher. My time is worth nothing, right? So, I can go out and I can cut them down when I don't have anything better to do. But then if you want to get in machinery, that's of course expensive, plus an hourly cost, and it's got to have a butt sitting in the seat pulling the levers to make it operate.
Yeah.
And there gets to be a point where you can be spending $1,000, $1,500, $2,000 an acre to clear a piece that's never going to pay that back in production. But what do you gain? Access. You might gain a creek there. If you clean out a whole canyon, you might gain a creek back.
Right.
So sometimes it's difficult to justify that, like from a strictly business point.
Yeah.
And how that relates to fire is, we're to the point where there's a lot of land in the Great Plains that needs not just restoration, it needs reclamation. And that's the really expensive part. Like, you got to get to a point where you can maintain it and you can restore it. First, you have to reclaim it. And in some cases, you may not graze it for 3 years, then go make a 50-foot fire guard around it and wait for the right day in March when it's like really, 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 really windy, really, really dry and kind of warm, and throw a couple matches in there and see what happens.
Right.
There's more to it than that. And then even after a guy does that, there's other management that has, other management and other things you have to do to deal with, burn up trees if you didn't cut them beforehand and pile them. And yeah, it's complicated, but fire is definitely a tool that's in my toolbox that, is applied when it's contextually correct.
Right.
You said something earlier, you said it without saying it, and I think you said mimic the way the bisons do it, which was what a guest a couple of weeks ago said about bison biomimicry, right? And another reason that we have these brush problems is we don't understand how the bison use the prairie and use the plains.
Mm-hmm.
We talk about stock densities behind polywire of 250,000 pounds the acre, or 500,000 pounds the acre, and that's really pushing it. 500,000 pounds the acre, they're standing shoulder to shoulder, and you're moving them 4 or 5 times a day to get that much.
Yeah.
When bison went through here, I don't know, I've heard estimates of 2 million pounds per acre,
Mm-hmm.
which is, shoulder to shoulder, nose to butt for 2 days going by.
Right. Right. Right.
What was left? What kind of herd effect is that?
Right.
But more to the point is, how often did they use the ground? How often did they use this land?
Right.
And maybe an 18-month rest cycle isn't out of line from what the natural world looked like, or what the natural system looked like for the very narrow slice of history that the bison were free roaming in the plains.
Right. Yep.
I've been into researching and thinking about, what happened in native civilizations.
Yep.
Like right around 1500, after Europeans brought disease to Central America, population collapse. And where I go with it was the amount of bison that were in the prairies, and in California. Like, if I say anything else about bison in California, I'll be completely making it up because I have no idea. But plains bison, I can kind of understand.
Mm-hmm.
So when you have a mass die-off of the people that are living in a continent,
all their hunting pressure is removed from all the wildlife, including bison, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I would almost wonder if the big bison herds that were recorded, from 1860 to 1880, or I'm sorry, 1850 to 1873 ish, because that's when we were talking about these anecdotally, these enormous bison herds. That's when those records are from.
Yeah.
What if, because of lack of population pressure for the last 200 to 300 years, what if the bison had reached the point where they were overpopulated for the resource base in the Great Plains and they were heading for some sort of die off or extinction due to starvation and lack of resources? Because that's how the natural cycle would go. I mean, everything's a boom and bust. When we have a lot of rain, we have a lot of rabbits born. In the dry years, we have a lot of coyotes because they're chasing the rabbit curve, the rabbit birth curve.
Right.
So I don't know. I'm just kind of throwing that out there a lot as food for thought. And maybe by grazing, I try to let my pastures have 45 to 60 days of rest because that seemed during a growing season. During the winter, during a dormant season, I'll graze stuff down pretty low. But I like to kind of, a lot of folks would call it flash graze during the growing season because I want to grow as much as possible. My whole goal is I don't want to feed in the winter anything. I don't want to feed bulk. I don't want to feed dry matter in the winter. That's silly because I can grow that and I can grow that really easy.
Mm-hmm.
My dry matter's got to last me all year. And the only thing I want to import is a little bit of protein to get me through, the lean times when I'm not growing a whole lot on the ranch. So that's why I try to graze, get as many pounds on by rapid moves. So they're getting the cream of the crop out of all my pastures in those, probably two grazes that we're going to get during the growing season. And then during the dormant season, well, we just really slow that down and start letting them have protein and protein tubs.
Mm-hmm.
And I know there's a lot of folks kind of up north and west here, off in the Dakotas and Montana and Wyoming, and even far south, New Mexico and into old Mexico, guys doing 18-month or 1 year or year and a half rest periods on a pasture. And maybe that is more appropriate and much more in line with the philosophy and the thought of bison biomimicry.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know if I could make a living grazing 1 year out of three, though.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't seem, I'd really have to sharpen some pencils and see if that would work and see how,
Right.
I mean, it might work.
So what have you seen? What's your monitoring strategy? What are you looking at? What are your soil health tests telling you, or your landscape function tests? Like how do you get feedback in this type of system that you've been working in?
Well, soil tests are expensive. And what do you test? And then what do you run that? Then past that, it's what's the baseline or what's the goal of the testing? Is it just to monitor and collect data? A lot of that, like I said, soil testing is pretty expensive. As far as like soil carbon, stream flow, function, and I'm on board with doing some testing, but as far as like grid soil sampling, never done any of that. Not interested in it.
Yeah.
We monitor areas. So some of my key indicators, I like to look at how much grass I grow per inch of rainfall.
Mhm.
So after, every rain we get gets recorded, and after it rains, I'm always measuring grass. I'm either
Mhm.
measuring against my leg or I'm measuring against a yardstick that I carry in my side by side that I drive 90% of the days.
Mhm.
Always measuring grass to see how many inches of brown leaf, how many inches of green leaf, how many
Mhm.
inches of green since the last rainfall. A
Mhm.
lot of it, I just write down on a notebook, legal pad that I always have with me, keep
Mhm.
a bunch of it in my head. And I try to chart that grass growth over the year, how many inches of grass growth per inch of rainfall and how that translates to growth. Um, then the yardstick gives me a total bulk measurement and between the height of the green leaves, the height of the brown leaves, there's ratios that you can convert that to pounds of intake for what the cow is going to have. And then if it's just all brown, of course there's a different calculation for that versus if it's all green, it's got to be dried out and you only take a percentage of the weight. I watch my creeks really close. Well, I used to when it used to rain here. and and by watch the creeks, it's go to the lowest, go to the one of the lowest points on the ranch where the water's all running off of it, and watch what's coming down when we get an inch and a half rain in 20 minutes. Is the creek going to come red? Is it just going to come up and run, or barely going to move with a little bit of foam in the middle? And over time, what I've noticed is, by varying when we graze different parts of the ranch, playing around a little bit with grazing pressure, because of terrain, I'm kind of limited in a lot of areas of the ranch what I can do with polywire and stock density.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm not getting any younger, labor ain't getting any cheaper, and there's a lot of the ranch that I can do strip grazing and daily moves behind polywire on, or even get real crazy and do 4 or 5 times a day if I wanted to. But that's I've got about 13% of the ranch fenced off for that right now, and that can maybe eventually grow to about 20%. But that's going to be it. The rest of it's just going to be too hilly and too broken, too vertical to do much with. Or I just can't figure out how to get a fence there, get a fence across. Like there's never enough fences, there's never enough water. And I think a lot of people that are have started down the regenerative agriculture path and once they start subdividing and rotating and seeing the results of that, there's not enough fences, there's not enough water. And I think a lot of guys will say that.
For sure. Yeah, and I think that's something that I've been talking about a lot. Graham Hand and I talk quite a bit. He's a guy out of Australia, and he runs these RAMP, regenerative agriculture mentorship programs through HMI, and he's done 3 now. And I mean, he's a student of barriers of entry to change. This guy Doug McKenzie Moore studied how do people change and what are the barriers to entry. He's kind of boiled it down to infrastructure is why we're not seeing a lot of managers be super successful in changing landscape function. The ease of the moves is probably number one reason of whether or not so I've kind of boiled it down to, well, if it comes down to infrastructure, what is the payoff and how do you fundraise, and put capital to that investment and then explain to people, how quickly am I going to pay that off? What does that mean in terms of increasing my utilization or my stocking rate on my ranch? And is it going to be a 3-year payoff, a 5-year payoff? What's the payoff? So I'm constantly running all these models, in Excel sheets and, explaining to our investors hey, okay, we're going to invest in this much fencing, this much water pipe, and here's the payoff. And we're going to get this, higher price for our beef because we're going to be able to show the soil test and, the landscape function gains and all this. And, we're going to be able to communicate that to the customer in some way that's very meaningful to them, so it's a lot that goes into it. And it can be risky without, I think, really, really, really doing your homework, and I mean, I don't know, it's hard because the average rancher, what's the average herd size? You talked to a lot of ranchers, but what's the average herd size in the country?
I think official government statistics, I think, is 42 or 44.
Right.
That might not be exactly correct, but it's 40. It's definitely in the 40s somewhere. And average age, I think, is 64 now.
Okay. Has it started coming down yet?
No.
Yeah.
Like, and
Yeah.
that's a, I mean, that's a whole separate scary conversation.
Right. Yeah. But I guess my point in that asking you that question is, I was telling you about Servando Diaz and Chihuahua, and he's got 2,000 head, So the investments that he makes in infrastructure on his ranch to do daily or multiple days per, move. And on our social, I'm hoping to document that trip down there because, he's got hills and, again, the labor situation might be better down there, but, he's, you know, he a doubling of his rate means, okay, I'm going from, I think he's already doubled. So he's at 800, or he was at 800 head. Now he's at 1,600 or 2,000. Right. So like the gains from putting that fencing single strand high tensile or double strand high tensile in, to kind of subdivide the ranch a little bit more and do polywire, he gets that back pretty quick in being able to run more animals, right? So if you got 40 head, but then again, you probably don't have as big a land base, so I don't know. You got to be real detailed on the numbers. And I think the nice thing is we are finding ways, I think, to fence cheaper and cheaper to be able to train animals to, do this kind of grazing. But still it's not easy. It's a big hurdle to kind of get over. So
You said training cattle to get on the polywire program, and even with all the roped out Corrienes that I've bought, and the ones that bought from friends, they don't get out more than once or twice. If you keep a good, real hot charger, they learn to respect it, especially if they know that if they do get out, somebody's going to show up with a horse and a rope.
Right.
It's funny I say that. It's like, Corrietes have reputation for being wild and crazy.
Yeah.
And I get that. Stereotypes exist for a reason. It's true.
Yeah.
I'm just speaking truth here. But I've had several of them over the last few years that have needed to be roped. And it's kind of funny because guys will go out there, they'll start swinging the rope. Cow will be like, she'll start to trot off like, okay, I kind of remember this. But as soon as that rope hits her horns, she just lays down. She just laid down and was like, all right, I'm caught. Now what?
Right.
And she was actually going somewhere else because she liked to crawl out of fences and wouldn't stop doing that. Like she wouldn't mess with the poly wire that was at 12,000 volts, but she would literally crawl through the barbed wire. Didn't matter how tight it was. Like I would go out there and tighten it. And before I left, she'd be sticking her head through, then, a leg, and then the other leg. And I'm like, you're bleeding, chick. Quit that.
Right.
She didn't care. So
yeah,
at that point, she needs to find another job on someone else's ranch.
For sure.
So I got a couple of my buddies to come out. They roped her. Like I said, as soon as that rope hit her horns, she just fell down and just stopped. Like, okay, you caught me. I'm not going. Take the rope off so I can get back up and get some food. Didn't do that. Just brought the trailer over and backed the trailer right up to where she was. And she's like, oh, trailer. Flipped that rope a couple times. She stood up and walked into the trailer, turned around and stood there. My buddy reached in, flipped the horns off, then went back and closed the gate and hauled her off. Like, good riddance.
Bye. See you later.
But and then the last one we had to rope, she did the same thing. Like, just get the rope on her horn, she just lays down.
Oh, interesting.
Now I had one crazy one that as soon as she saw somebody come in the pasture on a horse, she was in the other corner.
Yep.
Definitely old rodeo stock on that one.
Right. Yeah. A lot of personality in those cattle for sure. But yeah, it's probably 50-50 between our herd quitters, between the Angus and the Coriani. But again, we did daily moves last year multiple times per day for probably 2 months, but it wasn't super. Yeah, they got good, but then you don't move them for a while, and it's they're only good as their recent training. So yeah, we're getting there. When I was doing 4 times a day, like I was working on my first ranch, I worked with a herd of Barzona cattle, and they were super hard to train to the wire, but I finally got them done. And I should have trained them when they first got there with like a fixed paddock with the, electric on the inside. And I didn't do that, but finally got them trained. And then I was like, okay, so that's how you do it. So yeah, it definitely, you can't underestimate that, in terms of, but what's nice, I guess, is once you have multiple generations on the ranch, and I don't know if you've seen this, but they teach their young ones, eventually if they're kind of born into it. So
they know that the fence is probably going to be hot, and they know that when they're real little, that I don't care if they walk right under it. Like building a calf-proof hot wire fence is too expensive. It just needs to be mostly cow resistant.
right, exactly. Yeah, for sure.
And the charger needs to be hot. And if you're still having problems training cattle to your charger, I would suggest trying a Taylor Cyclops.
Okay.
If you're using like a Speedrite, a Gallagher, or a True Test, they're gonna fire slower, and you can hear that on your tester, right? If you have a tester that beeps whenever it pulses, you can definitely hear that on a tester. So it's a Taylor will be faster.
Okay.
The Taylor will be way faster. So, and here's the difference. So you have a cow, yeah, they'll want it. They're going to try it. They're always going to try the fence. She sticks her head under there and finds something good and doesn't get a shock, takes that step, then the wire gets behind her shoulders before she's been in contact with long enough to get a shock.
Right.
Because it takes the Energizer so long to deliver a shock. Whereas the Taylor, it's like bam, bam, bam. And
quick. Gotcha.
A lot higher chance of hitting them on the face or the neck, make them back up instead of go forward.
For sure. Yeah. Are you doing single strand, or you guys do a grounding wire?
Single strand with a ground return.
Gotcha.
2 wires is expensive.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, 2 wires almost doubles the fencing cost.
Right.
And I use a 3/8 inch fiberglass post with a little steel clip on the top. When I see guys using a metal post and a really cheap plastic insulator, the cost that doesn't really cost a whole lot less than the whole fiberglass post that I'm using. Having a really cheap plastic insulator on a steel post on an electric fence doesn't make sense when you can have a steel clip on a plastic post that's non-conductive.
Right.
Why are we hanging our hot wire off of a ground rod?
Right.
That's just me.
Yeah. No, I get you. We started out with some of those wide posters. They call them star posts out of New Zealand or Australia. They're good for getting through real tough country, but we are ordering a whole bunch of
like those tumble wheels that the fence goes through and you just kind of roll it and the fence rolls along.
No. That's yeah. I can see why you're thinking that was a star, but the star post is like a better description is the Y post. It's not like a T post, but it's got a Y formation. They're all black and they got holes going all the way down.
Okay.
Yeah. It's pretty common in Australia. And so we ordered some from there, and they go on the ground great. It's not like a flange T-post at the bottom so they can come out, but we don't really remove them, but you can kind of adjust the height of the wire. And we've been going with 2 wire just for, because we get pretty dry and we don't really have good grounding. So yeah, we have the grounding wire that goes in through the fence too, so a hot wire and a grounding wire, so they got to hit both to get a good shot, but they're pretty close to one another. So it's been working good for us. But yeah, we're moving for the line posts, we're moving to that fiberglass sucker rod. I think it's 1/2 inch is what we're getting, the real thick one that can like be used with a pneumatic post driver and get in the ground probably just as easy as these star posts. I think there still will be some situations where we'll need to use a metal post to kind of get in the ground because we're fairly granite based soils, and occasionally you'll run into a vein, here and there. But
I imagine rocks happen on the mountain ranch.
For sure. Yeah.
When it's, you keep saying sandy loamy soil, which is very similar, which is what I have a lot of. And when it's dry, I can solve a lot of fence problems, like low voltage problems, by going and irrigating my ground rods.
Right. Yep.
Like make a small hole in the bottom of a 5-gallon bucket, fill it up with water, and set it right by the ground rod, and let it just drip, 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 so it soaks all the way through.
Mm-hmm.
But I imagine if I was dealing with the amount of rain as a normal thing that I got this year, I'd probably seriously start thinking about running on ground wire. That might start to become an option just because of the amount of time and effort that it takes to go out and water your ground rods, especially if it's a permanent thing. I mean, if it's going to be
Right.
a thing and that's the way life is going to be from here on out, well,
Yeah.
maybe it's time to go ahead and put a ground rod in there, or put a
Right.
second ground wire in there.
Yeah.
So to circle back, you're asking me about my fencing. So I've posted about it on socials before, but I use a small diameter cable for my fence in
Okay.
between those plastic posts. It's like a 1.9 millimeter cable, and it comes on a 2-mile spool for like $400. It's
Wow.
pretty cheap to build fence that way, especially then with the fiberglass post and the metal clip. It's pretty reasonably inexpensive. Where I spend more money is like on the end fittings, like when I've got to tie off to a post, because you got to have something to tie off to, and then the fittings to do that, and things that people don't think about, like gate handles, jumper wires to get from one fence to another, just things like that'll almost nickel and dime you to death.
Yeah.
A lot to the cost, but I'm starting to rebuild a lot of that, and I call it temporarily permanent or permanently temporary fence.
Mm-hmm.
I can
Mm-hmm.
move it. No big deal. I mean, I've got a wire roller. I can go out and I can roll up the wire. I go pick up the post, go move it, no problem. But it's not the easiest thing in the world to do. I mean,
Right.
poly wire is at least 10 times easier, even though poly wire is probably 3 to 4 times the cost. And the step in posts are like, of course, I go off on a rant about insulator versus conductors for your electric fence, and I use step in post, and it's basically a steel post with a little piece of plastic on top. But that's something different than just the old rusty wooden thing with a cheap co-op insulator that I see a lot. So I do I have a lot of polywire, bunch of reels, bunch of polywire, bunch of step in posts, bunch of bat latches. So it's always fun to play around with stock density and rest periods and see what responds to what.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
So, you about ready to wrap up? I got to get out of here.
Yes, sir.
So where can everybody find you on the internet?
We are at perennialpasturesranch.com. And yep, that's our site. We're also on Instagram, Perennial Pastures Ranch, I believe, as well. All one word. We're also on Twitter at Regen Ranching. I think that's it for now. I'm on LinkedIn. I got my own personal Twitter. But yeah, I think that's pretty much the sources right now.
Okay. I heard there's somebody you'd probably get a kick out of on Twitter. I think her screen name is Recovering Vegan. I think she changed her Twitter handle to Recovering Vegan. Or just go to either Sean Baker or Paul Saladino's Twitter feed. For the last month, I bet one of them has retweeted a bunch of her stuff. But she's so on recording day, I think she's less than 40, but more than 30 days in to her journey of being a carnivore as a vegan, and she's diarying the whole thing.
Wow.
It's pretty cool. And
that's interesting.
She was just posting the other day about some hate mail that she was getting from some vegans, and they said, well, the reason that you weren't thriving as a vegan is you weren't taking the right supplements. And she posted a picture of this big tote of bottles of supplements. She's like, since I went carnivore, I quit taking all this crap and I feel better.
Right. That's awesome. I'll check her out for sure.
All right. It's been a lot of fun. Thanks, Kevin. Appreciate you.
Thanks, Brian. Appreciate the time. Great being here.
All right, gang. Have a great week.
All right, you too, man.